Okay, so we've had Daniel's prayer. We know why he's offering this prayer, and we know what he offered, what he prayed. We know what he prayed for, too. He wants God to declare an end to the 70 years of desolation and captivity for Jerusalem and for the temple. So here is the response to Daniel's prayer. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill. That's the hill that Jerusalem, well, particularly the temple, was built on. While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, we read about that in chapter 8, that would have been in the third year of Belshazzar's reign. That was 550 or so BC. This was the first year of Darius son of Medes. This is 538 or so BC, about 12 years later-ish. So he sees Gabriel again in the form of a man. Gabriel is not a man, but he's an angel, but he is in the form of a man here to take this message to Daniel. While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. Now, there are no evening sacrifices being offered right now. The temple is still in ruins. The altar has not been built. Now, when we get down to Ezra and Nehemiah, we're going to find out that one of the first things they did when they got back to the land was they built the altar again, so they could offer sacrifices. It was not the full temple. That would wait another 20 plus years. But they did get around to building the altar as soon as they could. They had to physically put the rubble away first, so they could at least offer sacrifices. And right now they can't even do that. In Daniel's day, at this point in time, they can't actually offer the evening sacrifice. But Daniel still computes his day around the sacrifices, around the evening and morning sacrifices. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. Okay, so before we get into the actual message here, there's two things we have to consider. Daniel is praying for the restoration of Jerusalem. Now, he is not going to be alive to see it, and he, I'm sure, knows that. He's 85 years old, maybe even older. He is not going, even if the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem tomorrow, that very day, and they started making preparations to go back like that hour, that instant, Daniel's day is done. He is not going to be able to go back with them. He is too old. He is not going to be able to make the trip. And even if he did, he is not going to be there to see the new temple built. I'm sure he knows that he is not going to see this happen. He has longed for this for 70 years, and it's not going to happen for him. And I'm sure he knows that. He's not praying for his own sake. He's praying for the city. He's praying for the temple. He's praying it for God's sake. That's what he wants. He wants the people to be allowed to go back and rebuild the temple and the city for God's sake, for the sake of God's name. And again, he's not even going to be in the group that does that. And he's not going to be alive to see it, almost certainly. But he's praying for that to happen for the sake of the name of God. That's what he's thinking about. Now, at some point, right around here, and I don't know how close in time this was to Daniel's prayer, maybe that very same day. I mean, there's a chance that somewhere else in the kingdom at this very moment, Cyrus was issuing the decree to allow the captives to go. That's going to happen. Like, Daniel is going to get the answer to his prayer. The people are going to be allowed to go back and rebuild their temple. That decree is going to be given. Cyrus is going to allow them to do that soon. I don't know how soon in context of Daniel's prayer here in the first year Darius the Mede. It could be right then, it could be a year or so later. I'm not clear, okay? I'm not clear on how the reigns of Darius and Cyrus overlapped. So I don't know, okay? But it's soon. It will not be long before Cyrus does. Cyrus is famous for allowing, not just the Jews actually, but for all the captive people that he inherited. When he conquered Babylon and Lydia and some other countries that he conquered, He inherited their territories and their kingdoms, and he also inherited all the people that they had captured, those kingdoms had captured, and were holding captive over the years. Assyria did that 200 years ago. Assyria did it to the northern kingdom of Israel 200 years earlier. That was an old, long-standing policy in this region that dated back centuries at this point. Cyrus puts an end to that. Cyrus apparently, at some point in his life, Cyrus became aware that by following this policy of deportation and exile, that only speeds about the end of your own empire, because you create such hostility. Now, yeah, you do weaken the people. I mean, when Nebuchadnezzar took all the best people of Jerusalem away from Jerusalem, he weakened Jerusalem. He did do that. But he also brought with him a bunch of people who hated him and planted them in his own city. Okay? So you're allowing people who hate you to live in your own city and stir resentment. Now, the idea is that eventually you would educate them to be part of your people. That's what we try to do with Daniel and his friends. We've read about that in Daniel chapter 1. Nebuchadnezzar wanted the best men of Judah to become Babylonian in nature. That's what his whole goal was. But this policy kind of works, but it still creates opportunities for rebellion. And ultimately, it creates resistance that brings down your empire. At some point, and Nebuchadnezzar didn't see that happen. But at some point, you're going to have enough enemies within your own territory who hate you enough that they're going to fight you and bring down your empire. It's going to happen, okay? It always does. And somehow or another, this guy, Cyrus, apparently recognized that somewhere in his life. And we don't know much about the life of Cyrus. We don't really have any direct Persian sources for Cyrus's life. Pretty much everything we know about him comes from either the Bible or from Greek sources. So we don't really know much about Cyrus, at least from his own perspective. I mean, he obviously was a boasted a lot and bragged a lot. They all did back in those days. He's no different in that regard as any other king. But somehow or another, Cyrus had the bright idea. Maybe God himself gave it to him. Isaiah talks about, God speaks to Cyrus in the book of Isaiah, 150 years before he's born, about you being my servant, you being my guy, even though you don't acknowledge me. Cyrus was not a God worshiper. Maybe God himself gave Cyrus this idea. I don't know. But somehow or another, Cyrus had the idea that, hey, if I don't treat these people so badly, they may not hate me so much, and they may not try to fight against me like they fight against the people who treat them badly. So Cyrus had the bright idea to, instead of taking captives, to actually allow the captives that he had inherited from the kingdoms he conquered to go back to their homelands and resume their old ways of life, but the caveat being they had to pay tribute to Cyrus. I mean, he isn't going to let them just go, okay? That's not going to happen. He'll install governors over them to enforce an exact tribute from them, okay? Like, they're not independent, but they will be allowed to go back to their land and govern themselves and worship their gods as they see fit. And he did this for all the people he inherited as captives in Babylon, not just the Jews. The Bible talks about it specifically in terms of his dealing with the Jews, but he actually did this for all the people all the captives that he inherited from Babylon. So that is what Daniel is actually asking for, okay? That is Daniel's prayer. He's not thinking of anything beyond that. Daniel is going to get a lot more than what he asked for here. When Gabriel starts talking about this answer to this prayer, this message, this vision, he's going to go a lot beyond what Daniel is thinking of. Daniel is not thinking of any of this. Daniel is only thinking about the 70 years of captivity coming to an end, and the people, his people, being allowed to go back to their city, their land, and rebuild their temple for God's sake, for the sake of the name of Israel's God. That's what Daniel is thinking. And he's not thinking about anything beyond that. But his vision, the vision he gets here, goes much beyond that. Now, I'm assuming that when Gabriel says that the answer is given, I'm assuming that means that, yes, the decree to allow your people to go back is going to happen. That's going to happen soon. Maybe even happening at that moment. Like, there's a decent chance, and I don't know how the timeline matches up. We don't have enough information to be able to tell that. There's a decent chance that was happening at that moment in time. There's a decent chance that, when Daniel was praying this, somewhere else in the kingdom, Cyrus is issuing the decree at that exact moment. I don't know. I'll never be able to prove that. I'm not even sure if I'm going to say that I really believe that, but there is a decent chance of that. So that's what Daniel was thinking about. That's what he's praying about. That's what he wants to happen. And Gabriel is saying that's going to happen. That answer is given. But Daniel's also going to get a lot more than he bargained for here, because Gabriel's also going to go on and give him a much more elaborate response about what's really the grand scheme of things. So Daniel was only thinking of that temple. He wants that temple built. He wants that temple built for God's name's sake. But God has more planned than just that temple. We saw this a little bit in Ezekiel. When we got to the end of Ezekiel, we saw Ezekiel spent a lot of time, like the entire last part of his book, giving us this great and glorious vision of this future state of Israel and this magnificent temple that's going to be at the middle of it. And I said that actually Ezekiel is giving us a vision of the same thing that John gives us a vision of at the end of Revelation, of the future paradise state. That's actually the same thing. But John doesn't see a temple. And in fact, he specifically says there's no temple in this city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple. They're in the city. There's no need for a temple, because the presence of God is here. In Ezekiel's day, Ezekiel could not envision a perfect world without a temple. He could not do it. In 570 or so BC, whenever he had that vision, after the temple had fallen, he'd been in captivity for 25 years at that point. The temple had fallen about 15 years ago, so it was gone. Okay, he was a priest. Okay, he never got to actually serve as a priest, but he had been raised in a priestly family, raised to be a priest. He never got to serve as a priest. He thought of things like a priest does. He saw the world from the point of view of a Hebrew priest. And so in his vision, in his concept of the world, he could not envision a perfect world without a temple. He just could not do it. It was not possible for him. So when God gave him this vision of this great and glorious future, it had a temple in it. And the temple was the main thing of it. When John comes along 600 years later, and he's describing the perfect world to come, he's ready to receive a revelation that does not involve a temple. Okay? John in Revelation is ready to receive a revelation of the perfect world, of God's perfect future state that does not involve a temple. It does not need a temple. Ezekiel was not ready for that. Daniel was not ready for that. When Daniel is thinking of what he wants, what his goal is, what he thinks the goal should be, he thinks of that temple. He wants that temple built. But God's plans are far greater than just that temple. That's important, okay? And when we get to the next section of the Bible, and we read about them going back to the land, we'll find out that the temple is important. 2 of the prophetic books of the Bible are about building that temple again. Haggai and Zechariah are all about rebuilding that temple. And that's 1/6 of the minor prophets. I mean, there's 12 of them, and that's 2 of them right there. And that's their entire subject matter, is build that temple. So that is important. It's important enough to get 1/6 of the entire prophetic lineup devoted to it. So it is important, but that's not the only thing in God's plan. God has a much greater plan than just that temple. And so Gabriel here, in responding to Daniel's prayer, is going to tell him that yes, what you want will happen. What you requested will be granted. Your people will be allowed to go back, and they will be allowed to rebuild that temple. But there's more to it than that. It's not that simple. That temple is not the end-all, be-all. It's not God's only priority. So now he's going to give him more information about the grand scheme of things. So, therefore, as soon as you began to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. I would love to have an angel of God tell me that. You are highly esteemed. I don't know if I'm highly esteemed. I think I'm greatly loved, but I don't know if I'm highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. 77s are decreed for your people. So not just 70 years. The 70 years, that's not it. That wasn't just a small piece of it. It's not just 70 years. There's 77s are decreed for your people. and your holy city, to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, which means to fulfill it, and to anoint the most holy. That's quite a plan. That's quite an elaborate set of goals. To finish transgression, there's a footnote here. Let's see what the footnote says. Restrain transgression. I'm not entirely. There's two ways you could look at that. So here are our goals. Okay, it's not just about this temple. It's we have God has other goals beyond just this temple. That is a goal, okay, and we'll get to that. But there are other goals beyond that. Here are God's goals. Here are the things He's trying to achieve in the 77. We'll get to that in a moment. He's going to finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for wickedness, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy. And those are God's goals. Finish transgression could mean to bring transgression to its full, in the sense of, let the transgression, we do see a concept of that throughout the Bible. We saw it in the days of the flood, before the flood, when God let the earth get so bad off that He had no choice left but to wipe it out and essentially start over with one family. Okay? And we see that even in the New Testament, we read about it in Romans 1 and 2 Thessalonians 2, this idea that God will let people who refuse to obey Him, who refuse to listen to Him, go off and do their thing until they destroy themselves. That's part of the way He judges sin. He even did that to Israel. When Israel wouldn't listen to them, He said, fine, I'm going to let you go this far, and then you're going to get wiped out. To some degree, God's punishment for sin is to allow the sinner to continue sinning until his own sin destroys him. The evil contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction. The serpent, way back in the garden, God told the serpent that the seed of the woman is going to end up crushing her head. Well, He did that by getting the serpent to crush his own head. And we read about in 1 Corinthians, God allowed evil essentially to destroy itself, thus completing God's own plan. So the evil contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction. So finishing transgression could refer to the idea of letting the transgressors get so full, letting the transgressions get so full that they destroy themselves. That could mean that. And it could also mean to restrain transgression. It could mean we're going to put a stop to it. There will be no more transgression. Within the scope of these 77s, transgression will be brought to an end. I'm not really clear of which of the two meanings applies here. Which of the two meanings applies here. But I think those are the two possibilities for what that means. Put an end to sin seems pretty self-explanatory. Now remember, there is a transgression offering and a sin offering. If you go back to the Levitical chapters and you read about their sacrifices, they had two distinct categories of the guilt offering and the sin offering. And you had one kind of offering that was between that spoke to the guilt that a man bore before God. And you also had the offering that spoke to the guilt a man bore before another man whom he had sinned against. Okay, there's person-to-person sinning, and then there's every sin ultimately is a sin against God. But there is a type of sin that is person-to-person sinning, and that was the trespass offering and the guilt offering, and then there was a sin offering, which is how you clear your sins before God. So these are two separate categories. It's all sin. In the end, it's all sin. Because every sin we commit ultimately is a sin against God, whether or not there's someone else involved. So we're finishing transgression, we're putting an end to sin. I think putting an end to sin means pretty self-explanatory. We're going to stop sinning. In these 77s, in this period of time, not just these 70 years of desolation and captivity, but in this greater scheme of 77s, we're going to put an end to sin. To atone for wickedness, that's sacrificial language there. So somehow or another, in these 77s, we're going to atone for wickedness. We're going to make atonement, and we're going to bring in everlasting righteousness. So we're going to finish transgression. We're going to put it, which either means allow it to get to its full or to restrain it, or both. Maybe you're going to allow it to get to its full and then restrain it. You're going to put an end to sin. You're going to atone for wickedness. That's all sacrificial language right there. Because when you brought your sacrifice, you're making atonement for yourself. We read about that whole make atonement for you language of the priestly books consistently. And you're bringing in everlasting righteousness. So once you've done that, you don't need to atone for sin any longer, because there won't be any sin. Once there's everlasting righteousness everywhere, there will be no more wickedness, and thus no more need for sin offerings or transgression offerings. To seal up vision of prophecy, which means to fulfill it. We talked before about sealing up refers to sealing up a scroll. So you finish writing the scroll, you seal it up, and you preserve it. Okay? So you're done. You've sealed up the visions. You've sealed up the prophecies. Which means you've written them. They're done being written. Okay, so when the scroll is finished, it's sealed up. It means there's nothing more to write, nothing more to say. And then you seal up and you preserve it. So sealing up vision and prophecy means to fulfill it. You've spoken the prophecies, you preserve them for the future, and then it's time for them to be fulfilled. And to anoint the most holy. Now, not clear if that's the most holy one or the most holy place. There's a footnote down here saying the anointed one, or the most holy place, or the most holy one. So I don't know what that means to anoint the most holy place, as in a physical location. You know, they had in their temple the Holy of Holies, the most holy place, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. And it could be a reference to Jesus going into the most holy place when he ascended to heaven after being our sacrifice. This is all stuff the New Testament will talk about, particularly in the book of Hebrews. Or it could be the anoint the most holy one, like anoint the Christ, basically the Messiah, the anointed one. It could be that. I'm not clear. In either case, all of this is going to be done in the person of Christ. So these are the goals. Okay, this is the goal. Okay, and all 6 of these goals are going to be accomplished by Jesus. Okay, he is going to be the one to finish transgression, to put into sin. He's going to offer himself up as an offering to make atonement for wickedness. Jesus will fulfill all the different, they had a number of different offerings. We talked about that. They had 5 or 6 different categories of offerings. They had the burnt offering, you had the grain offering, you had the fellowship offering, you had the drink offering, which kind of got incorporated with the others. You had the guilt offering, you had the sin offering. Then you had the offering of the red heifer, that's where they got their ashes to put in their cleansing water. So they had different kinds of offerings and sacrifices, and all of them ultimately pointed to some aspect of Jesus' life and death. Jesus, in his life and his death, ultimately fulfilled all of these kinds of sacrifices. He only died once. He didn't die 7 times. But in his life and his death, in some way or another, he fulfilled all of these kinds of offerings and all these sacrifices. Not only did he fulfill the law, not only did he uphold the law and fulfill the law, he also fulfilled all these kinds of offerings and sacrifices. And by doing so, he atoned for wickedness, and he brought in everlasting righteousness. So all these things are going to be accomplished by Christ. And when he did that, he fulfilled every prophecy, and he anointed the most holy. Whether that was himself, as a person, the most holy one, or a place, because we do read about him going into the holy place after his ascension, and making God's presence accessible to us as our high priest. So all these things, all 6 of the things in this agenda are going to be accomplished by Christ, and it's going to happen in this time period called the 77s. So we're not just talking about 70 years anymore. It was 70 years of desolation for the land after the captivity, during captivity. And whether you talk about that from being 606 to 536 or 586 to 516, I think it can kind of be either, honestly, in a certain way. But that was just a 70-year period that was teaching them a lesson, and was scrubbing them of idolatry, letting the land rest and getting its Sabbath rest, which they had ignored, and letting the land be desolate for 70 years. And this is even greater than that. This is 77s in which to accomplish all of these things for your people and your holy city. So it's going to be his people and his holy city that somehow bring this about. Now again, Jesus is a Jew, so he does these things in Jerusalem. So that your people and your holy city refers to the fact that Jesus is a Jew. He comes from this holy people. He did these things in Jerusalem, and these are the things that he did. Okay, so that is the mission statement. The entire rest of the Bible is going to be about fulfilling that mission statement. God has now given to Daniel basically his mission statement, God's mission statement for what he is trying to accomplish in history. He's always been trying to accomplish it. It's not just now, okay, in 538 BC or whenever. It's not just now this becomes God's mission statement. God has always intended to do these things. God's intent throughout all of history was to accomplish these things. It's just that now he is revealing this to Daniel. At this moment in time, at this juncture in history, as they're on the eve of getting the decree to be able to go back and rebuild their temple, they've suffered the desolation, they've suffered the humiliation, they've suffered the captivity. God is ready for them to go back. I'm not even sure if they're ready to go back. As we find out when they get there, they're going to still have problems when they get there. I'm not even really sure if they've been matured and humbled to the point where they're ready to go back, but God is ready for them to go back. And at this juncture in history, he is giving to Daniel his mission statement, which again, he's had. This is not new. In the mind of God, none of this is new. But he is now revealing this to Daniel for him to write it down and reveal it to the rest of us through writing it down and sealing it up and preserving it for generations to come. I go back to what Moses said in Deuteronomy 29:29, way back here. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. That was part of his farewell address to the people, near the end of his farewell address to the people, shortly before he died. This is what was revealed to Moses. This is what has been revealed to Daniel. Okay? Daniel now has all of this, whereas Moses only had about this or so. And we have the rest of it too. We have all this revelation as well. God has had quite a bit to say. He didn't say this to Moses. When Moses was around and he was giving his farewell speech to the people in 1406 BC, God had not revealed this to him. This was still concealed to Moses and to the people of that day. But he is revealing it to, it wasn't revealed to Ezekiel 50, 60 years ago. It wasn't revealed to Jeremiah 80, 90 years ago. It wasn't revealed to Habakkuk or to Nahum or to any of the others. But it was revealed here. It was revealed to Daniel here at this moment in time for reasons ultimately known only to God. God is the only one who can tell you why he chose to reveal this information here and not any point before or after. He just did. Okay? This was the right moment in time to reveal this information, and so that is what God is now revealing. So Daniel was only thinking of 70 years, with his end goal being to rebuild that temple for the sake of God's name. But God had a much greater mission statement in mind, which is not just 70 years, but 77s. And these are the things that he intends to do. It's going to happen through Daniel's people and in Daniel's city. But it's going to be much greater than just 70 years, and it's going to be much, much more important than just a single temple. Okay, so now that's the mission statement. And we will go into detail about what that means and how that's going to unfold in the rest of the vision.